The blood-red sun dipped behind the distant mesas as Preston Shaw stood in the doorway of his cabin, watching the trail for any sign of riders, friend or foe. The year was 1878, and the Arizona Territory was still wild enough to keep a man's hand close to his pistol, especially a man with as much to protect as he had. "Pa, are you going to help me or not?" Preston turned from the doorway and sighed, looking at his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, who sat impatiently on a rough-hewn stool, a wooden comb in her small hand and an expectant look on her freckled face. Her mother's face, he thought with a familiar pang of grief. "Coming, little wildcat," he said, closing the door and sliding the bolt home. "Just checking the horizon." "You always check the horizon," Lily said with the remarkable perception of children. "Ma's been gone 3 years now, the bad men ain't coming back." Preston's jaw tightened as he crossed the cabin's plank floor. "It's aren't not ain't," he corrected automatically, taking the comb from her hand. "And a man doesn't have to have enemies to be cautious. Now turn around and let me see what I can do with this bird's nest you call hair." Lily giggled and spun on the stool, presenting him with the back of her head and a tangle of honey-blonde curls that had become his daily challenge since her mother, Sarah, had died of fever. For 3 years, he'd fought outlaws, droughts, and his own demons, but nothing quite confounded him like the task of making his daughter presentable each morning. "Braid it like Ma used to," Lily instructed, her little body already fidgeting. "The fancy way with 3 parts." Preston ran the comb through her hair and immediately hit a snag, causing Lily to yelp. "Sorry, wildcat," he mumbled, trying to be gentler. His calloused hands, more accustomed to breaking horses and mending fences than this delicate work, fumbled with the silky strands. "You're pulling too hard," Lily complained, but stayed put. She was used to his clumsy attempts by now. "I'm trying my best," Preston said, separating what he thought might be 3 equal sections of hair. He began to cross one over the other in what he hoped resembled a braid, but within moments, the strands were slipping through his fingers like water. "Pa, that's not right," Lily said with the exasperation of someone far older than her years. "You're making a mess of it." Preston started over, his brow furrowed in concentration. Outside, the evening wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the cabin walls. Tomorrow he'd have to ride into town for supplies, and the thought of it filled him with a familiar dread. Ever since Sarah's passing, town meant people, and people meant pitying looks and well-meaning but unwanted advice about raising a daughter alone. As his fingers tangled in Lily's hair for the 3rd time, she let out a laugh that was so much like her mother's it made his heart skip. She spun around on the stool, took the comb from his hand, and smiled up at him. "Let me show you again, Pa," she said. "Ma taught me before she went to heaven, but I reckon I didn't teach you good enough." "Well enough," he corrected with a small smile, his heart warming at her offer. "Well enough," she repeated, standing up on the stool so they were nearly eye level. "Here, turn around," Preston obeyed, feeling her small hands pat his shoulders before she began combing through his own shaggy dark hair. The absurdity of it, a grown man allowing his tiny daughter to demonstrate braiding on his head, would have made him the laughingstock of the territory if anyone saw. But here, in their isolated cabin with only the kerosene lamp casting long shadows across the walls, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "See, Pa, over not under," Lily instructed seriously, her fingers working with surprising dexterity. "Now you try again." As Preston turned and took the comb back, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both freeze. He moved swiftly to the window, pulling back the threadbare curtain just enough to peer into the gathering darkness. A lone rider was approaching at a leisurely pace, the silhouette unfamiliar against the darkening sky. "Stay inside," Preston told Lily, his voice instantly hardening as he grabbed his rifle from above the door. "But Pa, not another word, Lily, under the bed until I call for you." The little girl nodded solemnly and scurried across the room, disappearing beneath the iron-framed bed that had once belonged to her parents. Preston checked that his pistol was loaded before stepping onto the porch, rifle raised. "That's far enough," he called when the rider was within earshot. "State your business." The figure slowed, then raised both hands to show they were empty. "I mean no harm," a woman's voice called back, surprising Preston. "My wagon broke an axle about 2 miles back. I saw your chimney smoke and hoped for some assistance." Preston hesitated. Female travelers alone were rare in these parts and often meant trouble of one kind or another. Still, he couldn't leave anyone stranded as night fell. Coyotes and worse things prowled the desert after dark. "Come closer, but slow," he instructed, keeping the rifle ready. As the horse approached, Preston could make out more details. The rider was indeed a woman, wearing practical riding clothes rather than a dress. Her horse was a fine chestnut mare, well kept but tired looking. When she came into the pool of light spilling from the cabin windows, Preston felt a jolt of something he hadn't experienced in years. She was perhaps 25, with dark auburn hair escaping from beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Her face was striking rather than conventionally pretty, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, keen and intelligent, assessing him as thoroughly as he was her. "Amanda Blackburn," she said, swinging down from her horse with the ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the saddle. "I'm the new schoolteacher for Copper Creek." Preston lowered his rifle slightly but didn't set it aside. "You're about 15 miles off course, Miss Blackburn." "Copper Creek's that way." He nodded eastward. "I'm aware," she said dryly. "Hence my broken wagon and current predicament." Something about her confident manner made Preston almost want to smile, an unfamiliar sensation. Before he could respond, the cabin door creaked open and Lily peered out, curiosity overwhelming her obedience. "Pa, is it bad men?" she asked, then caught sight of Amanda and her eyes widened. "Are you a real lady, Lily?" Preston admonished, but Amanda Blackburn laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I certainly hope I qualify as a real lady," she said, bending slightly to meet Lily's eyes. "And you must be a real young lady yourself." "What's your name?" "Lily Shaw," the girl answered proudly. "I'm 8 years old and Pa was trying to braid my hair, but he's not very good at it." Preston felt heat rise in his cheeks at this frank assessment of his paternal failings being announced to a stranger. But Amanda didn't laugh at him as he feared. Instead, she looked from father to daughter with a softness in her expression. "Hair braiding is a particular skill," she said seriously. "My mother was a lady's maid before she married my father, and she made sure I could braid hair 6 different ways before I turned 10. Lily's eyes went round. "6 ways? Pa can't even do one." "Lily," Preston warned again, but there was no real sternness in his tone. He set his rifle against the porch railing, having decided that Amanda Blackburn posed no immediate threat. "Miss Blackburn, I can ride out to your wagon at first light and help with the axle. You're welcome to shelter here for the night. It's not much, but it's dry and safe." "That's very kind, Mr. Shaw," she said, leading her horse toward the small corral beside the cabin. "I accept your offer with gratitude." As Preston helped her unsaddle the mare, he caught Lily watching them with undisguised interest from the doorway. It occurred to him that aside from monthly trips into town, his daughter rarely saw other people, especially women. Perhaps that was a failing on his part, another of many since Sarah's death. Once inside, Preston busied himself adding more wood to the cookstove and setting out a third plate for their unexpected guest. The cabin suddenly felt smaller with Amanda Blackburn's presence, though not in an unpleasant way. She moved with easy grace, removing her hat and jacket, revealing more of that auburn hair, tied back in a practical but becoming style. "If you don't mind, I could help with Lily's hair before we eat," Amanda offered, noticing the comb still lying on the table where they'd abandoned it. "It's getting late, and I imagine she should be in bed soon." Preston nodded, watching as his daughter eagerly climbed back onto the stool, her posture straighter, more ladylike than usual, clearly wanting to impress their visitor. Amanda's fingers moved deftly through Lily's tangled curls, the comb sliding through with none of the snagging and pulling that characterized Preston's attempts. She spoke softly to the girl as she worked, asking about her favorite things to do and learn. Preston stirred the pot of stew he'd prepared earlier, listening to their conversation with a strange tightness in his chest. "There now," Amanda said after just a few minutes, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "A perfect braid fit for a princess." Lily hopped down and spun in a circle, reaching back to feel the neat plate that hung down her back. "Pa, look, it doesn't even hurt when I move my head," Preston smiled, really smiled for what felt like the first time in years. "It looks mighty fine, Wildcat." "You should thank Miss Blackburn properly." Lily threw her arms around Amanda's waist in an impulsive hug. "Thank you. Can you teach Pa how to do it? He tries real hard, but his fingers are too big and clumsy." "I'd be happy to show him," Amanda said, her eyes meeting Preston's over Lily's head. Something passed between them in that moment, a shared understanding that made him look away first. During dinner, Preston learned that Amanda was from Boston originally, but had spent the last 5 years teaching in various frontier towns, gradually moving westward. She had no family, having lost her parents years ago, and seemed perfectly content with her independent life. "What brings you to Copper Creek?" Preston asked as they finished their meal. "It's hardly a cultural center." "The school board offered a fair salary, and I've learned that smaller towns often appreciate education more than larger ones," she answered. "Besides, I've always been drawn to places others might consider challenging." Her eyes met his again, and Preston found himself wondering what she saw when she looked at him, a rough cowboy out of his depth with a young daughter. A man still haunted by his past, or perhaps just another lonely soul trying to carve out a life in this unforgiving landscape. After dinner, Preston made a pallet for Amanda near the stove while he and Lily took the bed, as was their custom. The cabin had only the one room with a curtain Preston had rigged to give Lily privacy when she dressed. It wasn't ideal for hosting visitors, but Amanda made no complaints. As he tucked Lily in, the girl whispered loudly, "I like her, Pa. Can she stay and be my new ma?" Preston nearly choked at his daughter's directness. "Hush now," he whispered back urgently. "Miss Blackburn is our guest, not a replacement for your mother. Now go to sleep." But as he lay beside his daughter in the darkness, listening to the deep, even breathing that told him Lily had drifted off, Preston couldn't help but think about Amanda Blackburn. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to notice a woman as anything more than a polite acquaintance. Sarah's death had left a wound that he'd never tried to heal, focusing instead on keeping their ranch running and raising Lily as best he could. Morning came with the first rays of sun slipping through the cabin windows. Preston woke to find Amanda already up, quietly stoking the fire in the cook stove and setting water to boil for coffee. Her hair was down, falling in waves past her shoulders, and she'd changed into a fresh blouse, though she still wore her practical riding skirt. "You didn't have to do that," Preston said softly, careful not to wake Lily as he slipped out of bed. He'd slept in his clothes, minus his boots, out of propriety. Amanda gave him a small smile. "I'm an early riser, and you were kind enough to offer shelter. It seemed the least I could do." They worked together in companionable silence, preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and the last of the bacon. When Lily finally stirred, she came to the table with her hair already a wild tangle around her face, the neat braid from the night before long unraveled. "Can you fix my hair again?" she asked Amanda hopefully, climbing onto her chair. "After breakfast," Amanda promised, "and perhaps I can show your father how to do it so he won't need my help in the future." Preston felt a twinge of something like disappointment at the reminder that Amanda would soon be on her way to Copper Creek, never to pass through their lives again. It was ridiculous, of course. One night of civilized company didn't change anything about his situation. After they'd eaten, true to her word, Amanda sat Lily on the stool and beckoned Preston over. "Watch carefully," she instructed, separating the girl's hair into 3 even sections. "The secret is to keep the tension consistent, not too tight but not too loose." Preston stood close enough to observe, but not so close that he invaded her space. Still, he couldn't help but notice the scent of lavender that clung to her, probably from some soap or perfume she carried in her saddlebags. It was a refined, delicate smell that seemed out of place in his rough cabin, yet somehow perfect on her. "Now you try," Amanda said, unraveling the half-finished braid and stepping aside for Preston. Taking a deep breath, he positioned his hands the way she had shown him, dividing Lily's hair carefully. This time, as he crossed one section over another, the strands stayed where he put them. He worked slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration, but the braid was taking shape under his fingers. "That's it," Amanda encouraged, standing close enough that her shoulder occasionally brushed against his arm. "You've got steady hands, Mr. Shaw. You just needed the right technique." "Preston," he said, his voice gruffer than he intended. "Call me Preston." Amanda's smile widened slightly. "Preston, then." When he finished the braid, it wasn't as neat as Amanda's had been, but it was recognizable and held together when Lily jumped up to inspect it in the small mirror that hung on the wall. "You did it, Pa," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around his waist. "It's almost as good as Ma used to do." Preston felt a rush of pride mixed with sadness at the comparison. Sarah had made everything seem effortless: cooking, cleaning, raising a child, even loving him despite his many shortcomings. He had never expected to find himself trying to fill her shoes, and most days he felt like he was failing miserably. "Thank you," he said to Amanda when Lily had run outside to feed the chickens. "For the lesson and, well, for not laughing at a grown man struggling with such a simple task." "There's nothing simple about raising a child alone," Amanda said quietly, "especially not a daughter. You're doing better than you think, Preston." Their eyes met, and this time neither looked away. Something shifted between them, a recognition of shared understanding despite their different backgrounds. Preston cleared his throat first, breaking the moment. "We should head out to your wagon," he said, reaching for his hat. "The sooner we get it fixed, the sooner you can be on your way to Copper Creek. They'll be wondering what happened to their new schoolteacher." They rode out together with Lily perched in front of Preston on his gelding. The morning was clear and cool, a perfect spring day in the territory. Amanda led the way, guiding them to where she'd left her wagon with its broken axle. As they rode, Lily chattered excitedly, asking Amanda dozens of questions about being a teacher and living in cities like Boston. Preston remained largely silent, content to listen to their conversation and occasionally scan the horizon out of ingrained habit. The truth was, having Amanda and Lily fill the quiet with their voices made the familiar landscape seem different, somehow less lonely, more full of possibility. The wagon had been left in a small arroyo, partially hidden from the trail, a wise precaution in an area where unattended property often disappeared. Preston assessed the damage quickly. "Axles cracked clean through," he said, kneeling to examine it more closely. "I can jury-rig something to get you to town, but you'll need a proper replacement before you try to travel any further." Amanda nodded, watching him work with interest. "I don't suppose there's a wagon right in Copper Creek." "Blacksmith can probably handle it," Preston replied, already gathering materials from the supplies Amanda had in her wagon. "Illy Johnson's been fixing wagons in these parts for 20 years. Tell him I sent you, and he might even give you a fair price." As Preston worked, Lily convinced Amanda to show her some of the schoolbooks she had packed. The two sat on a nearby rock, heads bent together over a volume of poetry, with Amanda occasionally helping Lily sound out the more difficult words. Their laughter drifted across to Preston, making him pause more than once to watch them. It took most of the morning, but Preston finally had the axle secured well enough for travel. "It'll hold to Copper Creek," he assured Amanda as he wiped his hands on a rag. "But don't push the pace." "I can't thank you enough," Amanda said, reaching into her purse. "Please let me pay you for your trouble." Preston shook his head firmly. "No need for that. Neighbors help neighbors out here. It's the only way to survive." "But we're not neighbors," she pointed out. "Copper Creek is a good half-day's ride from your ranch. Close enough by territory standards," Preston said with a shrug. "Besides, Lily would never forgive me if I took money from her new friend." Amanda smiled at that, looking over at the girl who was now chasing a lizard among the rocks. "She's a special child. You've done well with her, despite the circumstances." Preston felt an unexpected surge of emotion at the simple compliment. He'd received plenty of praise for his skills with horses and cattle over the years, but rarely for his parenting. "Thank you," he managed. "That means something, coming from a teacher." As they prepared to part ways, loading Amanda's belongings back into her repaired wagon, Lily suddenly looked crestfallen. "Do you have to go?" she asked Amanda, her lower lip trembling slightly. "You could stay at our ranch." "Pa needs help with my hair every day." Amanda knelt down to Lily's level, her expression gentle but serious. I have students waiting for me in Copper Creek, sweetheart, children who need to learn to read and write just like you already can. But I could learn more, Lily persisted. Pa says I'm smart as a whip. And he's right, Amanda agreed, but I made a promise to the people in Copper Creek and keeping promises is important, don't you think? Lily nodded reluctantly. Yes, madam. Tell you what, Amanda said after a moment's thought. If your father agrees, perhaps you could come visit me in town sometime. I could lend you new books to read and maybe even give you a proper writing lesson. Lily's face lit up and she turned to Preston with pleading eyes. Can we, Pa, please? Preston hesitated. Their trips to town were usually brief and focused on necessities. The idea of going in just to visit someone was outside their normal routine, but the hope in his daughter's eyes was impossible to deny. I suppose we could arrange that, he said finally. We'll be needing supplies again in a couple of weeks. The smile that bloomed on Amanda's face nearly took his breath away. I'll look forward to it, she said, her eyes meeting his with warmth that seemed to reach right through his carefully constructed defenses. As they watched Amanda's wagon roll away, Lily waved enthusiastically until it disappeared over a rise in the trail. I like her, Pa, she said for the second time in as many days. She seems like a fine woman, Preston agreed, trying to keep his tone neutral despite the strange lightness in his chest. And she taught you to braid my hair proper, Lily added, reaching up to touch the plait that still hung neatly down her back. Maybe next time she can teach you something else. Like what? Preston asked, curious about his daughter's train of thought. Lily shrugged as they mounted up to head back to the ranch. I don't know, whatever grown-ups need to learn before they get married. Preston nearly fell off his horse at her casual comment. Lily Shaw, what has gotten into you? Miss Blackburn is just being neighborly, and so are we. There's nothing more to it than that. If you say so, Pa, Lily replied, but her tone made it clear she had her own opinions on the matter. The days that followed felt longer than usual. Preston threw himself into ranch work, mending fences that had needed attention for months and breaking a young colt he'd been putting off training. Lily seemed equally restless, asking daily when they would go to town, even though they both knew it was too soon for their regular supply run. Each evening, Preston braided his daughter's hair before bed, his fingers growing more confident with practice. Sometimes Lily would laugh at his mistakes, taking the comb from him to demonstrate again the technique Amanda had taught them. In those moments, with Lily's small hands guiding his larger ones, Preston felt a confusing mixture of pride in his daughter's capability and a deeper longing for something he couldn't quite name. 2 weeks passed slowly, but finally it was time for their trip to Copper Creek. Preston woke before dawn to find Lily already dressed, her face freshly scrubbed and her eyes bright with anticipation. You're up early, Wildcat, he observed, hiding his amusement as he prepared a quick breakfast. I want to look nice when we see Miss Blackburn, Lily explained, presenting him with the comb. Can you braid my hair the fancy way? Preston did his best, working slowly to make the braid as neat as possible. When he finished, Lily inspected it in the mirror and pronounced it almost perfect, high praise from his critical daughter. The ride to town was filled with Lily's chatter about what books she hoped Amanda might lend her, and whether the schoolhouse in Copper Creek was bigger than the one in the last town they'd visited. Preston listened with half an ear, his thoughts running along their own track, wondering how Amanda had settled in, if she'd found decent lodgings, whether the townsfolk were treating her well. Copper Creek came into view just before noon, a collection of wooden buildings stretching along both sides of the main street. It was larger than the settlement Preston usually visited for supplies, with a proper hotel, a bank, and even a small church with a bell tower. The schoolhouse sat at the far end of town, a white clapboard building with a small playground area beside it. As they rode down the main street, Preston was conscious of curious looks from the townspeople. He was a stranger here, and strangers were always subject to scrutiny in these small communities. He kept his back straight and his expression neutral, nodding politely to those who met his eye. They tied up their horses in front of the general store, and Preston helped Lily down. We'll do our shopping first, he told her firmly, seeing her eagerness to run straight to the schoolhouse. Then we'll see if Miss Blackburn is available for a visit. Lily sighed but didn't argue, following him into the store where Preston efficiently collected the supplies they needed. The shopkeeper was a friendly older man who introduced himself as George Miller and seemed eager to make conversation. "Haven't seen you folks around before," he commented as he weighed out sugar for Preston. "Just passing through." "We're here to visit the new schoolteacher," Lily announced before Preston could answer. "She taught my pa how to braid my hair when her wagon broke down near our ranch." Miller's bushy eyebrows rose in interest. "Ah, Miss Blackburn, is it? She's made quite an impression already. Smartest lady we've had teaching here in years, according to my grandson. Lives in the room above the milliner's shop, case you're looking for her. School's out for lunch about now." Preston thanked him for the information, paid for their supplies, and loaded everything into their saddlebags. As they stepped back onto the boardwalk, Lily tugged at his hand impatiently. "Can we go see her now, Pa, please?" Preston hesitated only briefly. "I suppose we could walk past the milliner's, see if she's at home." They made their way down the street with Lily practically skipping beside him. The milliner's shop was a neat establishment with ladies' hats displayed in the window. A side door led to a separate entrance, presumably for the upstairs lodgings. As they approached, the door opened and Amanda Blackburn herself stepped out, dressed in a simple blue dress with her hair pinned up in a more formal style than Preston had seen before. "Miss Blackburn," Lily cried out, breaking away from Preston to run toward her. Amanda's face lit up with genuine pleasure as she caught sight of them. "Lily, Mr. Shaw, what a wonderful surprise." "Preston," he reminded her, removing his hat as they approached. "We were in town for supplies and remembered your invitation." "I'm so glad you did," Amanda said warmly. "I was just about to have lunch. Would you both join me? It's simple fare, I'm afraid, but there's plenty to share." Preston started to decline, not wanting to impose, but Lily was already nodding enthusiastically. "We'd be much obliged," he found himself saying instead. Amanda's rooms were small but cozy, with a miniature kitchen area, a sitting room filled with books, and what Preston assumed was a bedroom behind a closed door. Everything was neat and organized, reflecting Amanda's practical nature. She quickly set out plates and cups on a small table, adding an extra chair for Lily. "How have you been settling in?" Preston asked as they ate the simple meal of bread, cheese, and apples that Amanda provided. "Quite well," she replied. "The children are eager to learn and the town has been welcoming. The work is challenging but rewarding," she smiled at Lily. "I have a student about your age who's very good at mathematics. Perhaps you could meet him someday. Is your wagon fixed proper now?" Lily asked around a mouthful of apple. "Chew with your mouth closed, wild cat," Preston reminded her gently. Amanda's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Yes, Mr. Johnson repaired it beautifully. He even refused payment when I mentioned your name, Preston, said any friend of yours was a friend of his." Preston felt a flush of embarrassment. "Illy and I go back a ways. His son and I rode together during the war." "The war?" Amanda's expression grew more serious. "You fought for the Union," Preston nodded once. "Last 2 years, came west afterward looking for a fresh start." He didn't elaborate, and Amanda didn't press, seeming to sense his reluctance to discuss that part of his life. After lunch, Amanda brought out a stack of books for Lily to look through, and the girl settled happily on the floor, paging through them with reverent fingers. With Lily occupied, Preston found himself alone with Amanda by the small window that overlooked the main street. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I've thought about you both often these past weeks." Preston's heart beat a little faster at her admission. "We've thought about you too," he said, then corrected himself. "Lily's talked about you nearly every day." "And you?" Amanda asked, her gaze direct in a way few women's ever were. "Have you thought of me at all, Preston Shaw?" The question hung between them, more intimate than any touch. Preston found he couldn't lie to those clear eyes. "Yes," he admitted, "more than I should, perhaps." Amanda's smile was worth the risk of his honesty. "I'm glad," she said simply, "because I'd very much like to see you again, both of you, not just in 2 weeks' time for supplies." Preston looked over at his daughter, absorbed in her books, her braids still neat down her back. 3 weeks ago, he would have dismissed the possibility of any new relationship, convinced that he and Lily were managing fine on their own. But now, watching the sunlight play across Amanda's face, he found himself considering a different future. "I'd like that too," he said finally. "Though I'm not sure what the good people of Copper Creek would think of their schoolteacher associating with a rough rancher from outside town." Amanda's laugh was warm and unconcerned. "I've never much cared for other people's opinions of my choices," she said. "One of the benefits of being an independent woman, I suppose." Before Preston could respond, Lily looked up from her books. "Pa, can Miss Blackburn come to our ranch for Sunday dinner? She could stay the night and ride back Monday morning. I could show her my chickens and the new calf." Preston glanced at Amanda, eyebrows raised in silent question. "You'd be welcome if you're interested in seeing our humble operation." "I'd be delighted," Amanda replied without hesitation. "I have no commitments this Sunday." They agreed on the details, with Preston promising to ride in to escort her to the ranch. As they prepared to leave, Lily carefully selecting 2 books to borrow with Amanda's permission, Preston found himself reluctant to say goodbye, even knowing they would meet again in just a few days. "Thank you for the meal," he said formally, settling his hat back on his head. "And for making Lily's day with the books. The pleasure was mine," Amanda assured him. On impulse, she reached out and straightened his collar, her fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "Until Sunday, Preston." The ride home was filled with Lily's excited plans for Amanda's visit, but Preston found his own thoughts running deeper. For the first time in 3 years, he was considering the possibility of letting someone new into their lives, not as a replacement for what they had lost, but as something different, something that might grow into its own kind of happiness. Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect for the ride between Copper Creek and the Shaw Ranch. Preston had spent the previous days in a flurry of uncharacteristic activity, fixing the sagging porch step, repainting the shutters, even slaughtering a chicken for the special dinner. Lily had been his eager assistant, cleaning the cabin until it shone and arranging wildflowers in a jar on the table. "Do I look all right, Pa?" she asked as they prepared to ride into town. She'd put on her best dress and her hair was loose around her shoulders. "Should I have you braid my hair?" Preston smiled at his daughter's nervousness, which mirrored his own. "You look beautiful, Wildcat, but if you want your hair braided, I'd be happy to do it." Lily considered for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I'll let Miss Blackburn do it later. She said she knows 6 different ways, remember?" They arrived in Copper Creek just as church was letting out, the congregation spilling onto the street in their Sunday best. Preston felt conspicuous in his clean but well-worn clothes as he tied up his horse in front of the milliner's shop. A few curious glances came their way, but he kept his focus on the door, waiting for Amanda to appear. When she did, Preston's breath caught in his throat. She wore a simple dress of deep green that complemented her auburn hair, which was styled more elaborately than he'd seen before. She carried a small valise and wore a practical riding jacket over her dress, but there was no mistaking the elegance with which she carried herself. "You came," she said, her smile brightening as she caught sight of them. "Said we would," Preston replied, taking her valise and securing it to his saddle. He helped her mount her borrowed horse, conscious of the eyes of several townspeople watching their interaction with interest. The ride back to the ranch was pleasant, with Lily keeping up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling Amanda about the wildlife they sometimes spotted along the trail. Preston mostly listened, content to observe the easy rapport between his daughter and this remarkable woman who had entered their lives so unexpectedly. At the ranch, Lily eagerly showed Amanda around, from the chicken coop to the corral where the horses grazed. Preston hung back, seeing his humble homestead through Amanda's eyes and hoping she wasn't disappointed by its simplicity. "You've built something wonderful here," Amanda said when they finally returned to the cabin for dinner. "It's not grand, but it feels like a real home." "Sarah deserves the credit," Preston said honestly. "She's the one who made it a home. I've just tried to maintain what she created." Amanda's gaze was understanding. "And yet it still feels like home even 3 years later. That's your doing, Preston, yours and Lily's." The dinner was a success, with Lily proudly helping to serve the meal she and Preston had prepared together. Afterward, as promised, Amanda demonstrated several different braiding styles on Lily's hair, while Preston watched from his chair by the fire, a contentment he'd almost forgotten settling over him. As the evening deepened and Lily's eyelids grew heavy, Preston prepared the sleeping arrangements. "You'll take the bed," he told Amanda. "Lily and I will make pallets by the fire." "I couldn't possibly displace you both," Amanda protested. "We insist," Preston said firmly. "It's the proper thing to do." Once Lily was tucked in, fast asleep after the excitement of the day, Preston and Amanda sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. The night was cool but not cold, and the silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. "Your daughter is remarkable," Amanda said finally. "She has your strength and determination, but there's a gentleness to her as well. That must come from her mother." Preston nodded, his throat tight with unexpected emotion. "Sarah was the kindest person I've ever known." "Sometimes I worry that Lily's growing up too fast, too hard out here with just me." "Children are resilient," Amanda said, "and Lily clearly adores you. You're doing right by her, Preston, even if you doubt yourself sometimes." "I never expected to be doing it alone," he admitted. "When Sarah and I came west, we had such plans. A prosperous ranch, a house full of children, a community around us," he sighed. "The fever took her before any of that could happen." Amanda's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers warm against his skin. "Life rarely goes according to plan," she said softly. "My parents wanted me to marry a banker's son in Boston, settle down to a life of social calls and charity work. Instead, I'm teaching frontier children how to read and write, and sitting under the stars with a cowboy who's just now learning to braid his daughter's hair." Preston turned to look at her, finding her face lovely in the moonlight. "Do you regret it, coming west?" "Not for a moment," she answered without hesitation. "Every choice I've made has led me here, to this porch this night. How could I regret that?" The conviction in her voice stirred something deep in Preston's chest. Before he could think better of it, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a question more than a kiss. Amanda answered by drawing closer, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek as she returned the kiss with gentle certainty. When they parted, Preston found himself at a loss for words, overwhelmed by the rush of feelings he'd kept buried for so long. Amanda smiled, seeming to understand his silence. "We should get some rest," she said, standing and offering him her hand. "Morning comes early on a ranch, doesn't it?" Preston nodded, rising to follow her inside. At the door, he paused to look back at the starlit landscape, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted in his world. The ranch that had seemed like a place of duty and memories suddenly held the promise of a future he hadn't dared imagine. Morning did indeed come early, with Lily waking first and attempting to quietly prepare breakfast, though her clattering soon roused both adults. Amanda insisted on helping, and Preston watched with amazement as the two of them worked together as if they'd been doing it for years. Lily showing Amanda where everything was kept, while Amanda taught her a new way to scramble eggs. After breakfast, Amanda braided Lily's hair again, this time showing Preston a new technique that he practiced under her watchful eye. His fingers still fumbled occasionally, but there was progress, undeniable progress. "See, Pa." "You're getting better," Lily said, examining her reflection in the mirror. "Soon you'll know all 6 ways, just like Miss Blackburn." "I don't know about that," Preston said with a chuckle, "but I can manage this one well enough now." As the morning wore on, it became clear that they were all reluctant for Amanda to leave. Lily kept finding new things to show her, from her collection of pretty stones to a bird's nest she'd discovered in the old oak tree behind the cabin. Preston busied himself with chores, trying not to watch the clock, knowing Amanda needed to return to town for school the next day. Finally, as noon approached, he saddled both their horses. Lily's face fell as she realized the visit was coming to an end. "You have to go?" she asked Amanda, echoing the question she'd asked 2 weeks earlier when they'd first parted ways. Amanda knelt down to Lily's level, taking the girl's small hands in hers. "I do need to go back to my students," she said gently. "But this isn't goodbye, Lily, not really." You'll come back." Lily asked hopefully. Amanda glanced up at Preston, a question in her eyes. He nodded, his heart full. "If your father agrees, I'd like to come back as often as possible, perhaps every Sunday." Lily's eyes widened and she spun to face Preston. "Can she, Pa, every Sunday?" Preston cleared his throat, suddenly aware that this moment mattered more than most. "I was thinking," he said carefully, "that perhaps Miss Blackburn might consider a more permanent arrangement. In time." Amanda's cheeks flushed pink, but her smile was radiant. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Preston Shaw?" "Not yet," he said honestly. "It's too soon for that, but I'm asking if you'd be willing to give us time to learn each other, to see if there might be a future where our paths join more permanently." "I'd like that very much," Amanda replied, her voice steady despite the emotion shining in her eyes. "I think we all have a great deal to teach each other." Lily looked between them, her young face serious. "Does this mean Miss Blackburn might be my new ma someday?" Preston exchanged a glance with Amanda, seeing his own cautious hope reflected in her expression. "It means we're going to spend time together and see what happens," he explained to his daughter. "But yes, that's a possibility if it's what we all want." Lily considered this, then nodded decisively. "Good, because I like how she braids my hair and she makes you smile, Pa. You don't smile enough." Preston laughed, a free and genuine sound that surprised even him. "Is that so?" "It's absolutely so," Amanda agreed, rising to her feet and moving to stand beside him. "And I intend to give you many more reasons to smile, Preston Shaw, if you'll let me." As they rode toward Copper Creek side by side, with promises of letters during the week and another visit the following Sunday, Preston felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The future that had seemed so prescribed just him and Lily, getting by day to day, now sprawled before him full of possibilities. It had started with something as simple as a cowboy struggling to braid his daughter's hair, and a kind woman who stopped to help along the way. But perhaps that was how the best journeys always began, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with small moments of connection, of seeing and being seen, of hands guiding hands, until they found their way forward together.